Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Michael and Patty Show. I'm Michael.
And I'm Patty.
It's an absolutely balmy day here in PEI. I think it might be the coldest day in a long time. It's minus 21 Celsius, minus 32 Celsius with the wind chill. But there's good news.
We're not in Ontario.
Ontario's actually warmer than us, unless you're in northern Ontario. I think Kirkland Lake took the record for the coldest temperature at minus 43, was it?
That was yesterday, yeah.
So we're still warmer than that. But the good news on the island is, and a little tip to you if you're curious what's happening on the island as far as electricity, which is always a concern, is Maritime Electric, which will supply electricity to pretty well every house on the island, with exception of some homes in Summerside that are on Summerside Electric, which still feeds into the maritime grid, presumably. There's actually an active real-time map that will show you the outages, and this morning we had a big fat zero, which is good news.
That is good news.
When you see those numbers starting to climb up into the hundreds or the thousands, you know it's time to hunker down and make sure you've got fuel in your tank and the generator works.
Yeah, that's the one good thing Maritime Electric does. Between their website, their customer service, their online portal for your bill management and that, they do have a really good system.
Which, in terms of real estate, it's something that you want to be aware of, that you do establish a Maritime Electric account, or if you're in Summerside, in most areas of Summerside, not all, because some of the outskirts are in Maritime Electric, that you do establish your account with them before taking possession of your home. Otherwise, you might just find out that your lawyer forgot to do it, and you get there on a Friday night like I did, and there's no electricity.
That's not good. I didn't know that.
Yes. What didn't you know?
That you got there on a Friday night. Oh, but this would have been a client of yours.
No, this was a house I owned, and I got there on a Friday, and the lawyer's office contacted the city of Summerside, and the house was actually on Maritime Electric, so there's no account, so they disconnected the service. So then a call had to be made for emergency service to reconnect it. I don't know why they wouldn't just reconnect it and ask who's buying this house, but whatever. Moving along here. One of the things we have to be aware of is if somebody is presenting an offer to us in an active listing and we're the listing agent, may it be on a text or an email or word of mouth or a phone call or a written letter, any and all offers need to be presented in any form. What you're starting to see recently is a trend where agents are putting on the MLS that all offers are to be on the MLS-specific forms. I'm not going to get into the debate whether that's legal or not, but my guess would be even if it's presented on the back of a 2x4, it has to be presented to the vendor, and they cannot dictate what means you present that offer in.
And you're absolutely right, but this is what I have encountered. So if you are a buyer and you just want to test the waters, because that's been my experience with buyers, one, they don't want the seller to know who they are. PEI can be it's a small community, small island. So they don't want to offend anybody, which is usually a red flag when they say they don't want the seller to know who they are. I would warn a seller to even entertain or respond and engage in that, because Murphy's Law, and I've had this happen where everything was quiet, and there was a verbal agreement brought forth to a seller client of mine who did feel inclined to verbally respond back only while we were waiting for the buyer and the buyer's agent to prepare their contract. The seller actually received a physical contract that they deemed worthy of acceptance. To which I said, well, now we could be in a multiple offer situation, regardless of them verbally agreeing to a counter with this verbal arrangement. Nothing was in writing. I know if you don't have your word, what do you have? However, from a legal standpoint, and Michael, you can weigh in on this, but they were not in a contractual agreement.
I think for the purposes of this subject, which is basically all offers have to be presented regardless of what medium they're on, you do have to understand if it's a verbal offer, it's something on the back of a match pack or something, that's probably not legally binding. And a lot of times people will say one thing today and then tomorrow they'll wake up and have a different decision. But we're doing this on the pretense that it really doesn't matter if this deal goes together. If I'm really concerned and this is the only house I want and I want it badly, obviously I'm going to write a written formal offer. I'm going to probably collaborate with the listing agent and make sure it's written in such a fashion that will get accepted, which brings us on to our next subject, which is collaboration wins the game. I've worked on 3 offers in the last few days here. Actually, not the last few days. 2 of them was in the last week. One of them's been dragging on since October. The one in October has basically been someone with a blindfold on shooting a dart at a dartboard, writing random offers, and every one of them has been rejected, and eventually the vendor just said they don't want to deal with the purchaser. Finally, after the purchaser's agent decided to collaborate and ask what the vendors are actually looking for and what they do and do not like about the offer, particularly the inclusions, because they were going after a lawnmower that was probably worth 10 or 20 grand with its accessories. That was one of the points of contention, which they would have known if they just talked to the listing agent. The other 2 deals within the last week were both collaborative. There's conversations. I know this is going to blow your mind, Patty. On the phone.
Oh.
Remember the phone where you talk into this microphone and someone receives it on a speaker on the other end, not texting back and forth, turning a 30-second conversation into a week? Both of those offers were signed. They're perfect. So those properties went under contract immediately. The other one has taken 3 months to go together arduously. And not only that, but the vendor got their back up and they've paid probably a lot more than they should have for the property because emotions got involved on the selling side because they just got annoyed with the non-collaborative behavior on behalf of the purchaser and the fact that he was forming his own decisions, not based on information that was factual data, but on conjecture, and the offers were formed on a basis that just wasn't reality.
Yeah, and one of the words that you used in there was more than the buyer should have. I would rephrase that and just say the buyer probably paid more than they could have negotiated. Great for the seller. It did take a few months, and obviously the seller didn't need to sell quickly. However, if you're a buyer, you want to make sure that the agent that is representing you has the skill set, knows how to do their business, and is able to have a conversation and communicate effectively over the phone with the other agent, because you may have paid however much more than could have been negotiated had there been better representation.
The biggest challenge is a lot of people ask for inclusions that the purchaser feel is nothing, but the vendors will look at it as if, and this is a real life situation, that I paid, $7,000 for that fridge. I paid $4,000 for that range. I paid $12,000 for that ride-on lawnmower. And the purchaser's coming in with an offer that's not asking price and then asking for what the vendor deems a value that's much more or exponentially higher than the purchaser puts on it. I think at the end of the day, you need to find out collaboratively with the listing agent is what does the vendor really feel these things are worth if we're negotiating on that. Bottom line is we're not in the furniture or the lawnmower business. Sometimes you just have to remove that from the equation altogether and just say, you guys can work this out on your own because it's getting too ridiculous when you're getting into 25 different items. And the other thing that's going to happen is if the bank sees lawnmowers and ranges and washers and dryers and furniture and all kinds of extra stuff, maybe a vehicle, I've had cars included in deals, that may affect your financing because the bank's going to tell you the same thing. We're not in the car business, the appliance, the furniture business. This is a large value, so now you're going to have to come up with a bigger down payment.
Yeah, so the lender is going to want to do an appraisal because they're not interested in financing these additional items. So by keeping your contract clean, dealing with what is actually being offered for sale, and that is whatever the property, the land, whatever the package is. And then once you have your clean offer and you're working through your conditions, if you want to introduce after perhaps a few items and have the agents have a conversation back and forth, you can do that at that time. But your initial offer, aside from maybe some collaboration, saying that the seller would be interested in including, a few items, appliances, obviously. Again, if they're of that price tag, Michael, a seller may be more inclined to keep their appliances. So that's something that the buyer's going to have to factor in and budget in. But keep your offer clean so that you don't red flag it with the lender and the underwriter on the file, which then is unfortunately sabotaging the buyer's ability to get finance approval.
Let's talk about emotional purchases. In PEI, we have several markets. We obviously have a farm market. We've got a commercial, multifamily apartment market. We've got all kinds of different products here. People aren't just buying single-family dwellings. And one of the products that we do have here for sale is very emotionally driven, and that is like waterfront, water view property. Recently, I had someone call me, ask what this property is worth. We did our comparables. Hypothetically speaking, it was probably worth about $30,000 to $50,000, and they paid $350,000 because it had a view of a wharf, and it was close to the water. It wasn't waterfront, but they paid a lot more for this based on emotion, but the factual data, the sales data, wasn't backing up their purchase price. And unfortunately, unless they find another buyer like them, it's going to be very, very hard to move that property. So be careful when you're buying property that you sort of turn down the emotion and crank up the what is this property worth? Because another thing people have a tendency to do is say, wow, this property in Miami would be worth this much. Well, this isn't Miami. And you can buy acreage, even in today's market, for extremely low amounts of money.
Yeah, have your agent who is representing you as a buyer do what is called a reverse CMA. Did this, listing agent and seller price this at fair market value? Or was it a fishing expedition where they are not motivated, they've priced it high, and if you're not an educated or informed buyer, you will trust that this property it must be on for market value. And because you're so wrapped up emotionally and you want to be able to get that secured, you do end up perhaps giving the seller what they're asking for, only to be the one left in the end, because you should always think exit strategy. So when the day comes that I do want to sell, and I can't tell you, and I'm sure you've heard it a lot, Michael, too, that I'm never selling this property, they'll be taking me out in a box. I've heard that every year. I hear that a couple times. And I'm telling you, life circumstances change, situations change, and more times than not, now the average property used to flip every 5 to 7 years. Today, people are holding on to their homes longer, and the National Association of Realtors is saying it's between 8 and 12 years now people are actually holding on to their properties. But within 8 to 12 years, or even round number 10, you will be looking for an exit strategy, and don't assume real estate's always going to go up so that you will at least make some money or break even, because that's not always the case.
Oh, absolutely. If you do look at the other real estate markets like I do, I've been looking at Las Vegas, Victoria, BC, Toronto. Those are just a few. Florida. A lot of those markets have gone down or are settling. So the thought that you're going to have this real estate going up by massive amounts every year just isn't reality. And if you compare a real estate sales chart in reference to the percentile gains yearly against, say, the S&P 500 index, I would say that index is probably a better bet from an investment standpoint, but a professional investor is always looking at the exit strategy, not what they can buy. Real estate's a very easy thing to get into, but not necessarily an easy thing to get out of, and life circumstances do change, and when you require liquidity or you need to sell that piece of real estate, It's going to be that planning, that buying on zero emotion, but based on factual data. And the other thing I would look at is days on market. If a property's been on for 5 or 6 or 10 years that you're buying, chances are those circumstances aren't going to change when you need to sell it in a month. And even if you discount the price down to nothing, sometimes there's just no floor. There's just no buyers at any price. And it's not the price, it's just there's zero demand.
Absolutely. And so that comes right back to make sure when you're entering in to a purchase that you've done your due diligence, you have done your research, you're well informed, that you're paying fair market value for that property. Now, there's always situations where you go into multiple offers and you might have to pay a little bit more if you truly want to secure it. But if you overpay right on the onset, and then this is a property that you do need to move, and however many years after ownership, you may be stuck with the property, and it could take you years to get that property moved. We've experienced that many, many times, I know, Michael, over the years. I had a single lady that lived in a far location on the island, and she had moved here from Ontario, and she purchased on emotion. It just made sense. And it took her about 4 years to be able to sell and get back to where her family and that was, because grandchildren were now presenting themselves. And it was very stressful for her. And she ended up suffering from depression and that. So you want to make sure. And she paid a premium for this property that had been on the market, like you had described, Michael, for years prior.
I know properties that have been on the market for 10 and 15 years, and there's just zero demand for them because they're remote, and just no one wants to pay $200,000-$300,000 for a property that's B or C grade, maybe it's half swamp, and pay a premium for that in a location they don't want.
Yeah. So just be mindful if you're a buyer listening to this and your agent's asking you a lot of questions that you don't deem important and you just want to push the gas pedal and get going, they may be trying to slow you down to make sure you're making an informed decision. You probably have a good agent there. So don't be, because I've had buyers say to me, so I have to answer all this before I just want to look at this property. Well, I wanted to make sure that I was setting them up for success long term and not just completing a sales transaction. So if you do have an agent that's asking you a lot of questions and you feel a little frustrated, now, I mean, there's an extreme to that, of course, as well. But if they're asking what kind of life expectations you're looking to experience, your lifestyle and all of that, you probably have a good agent and there's a reason for it.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our next subject here, which ties into asking questions. I was representing a seller, and it was a higher-end property, and the seller said before they got into a bunch of negotiating and back and forth, they want to make sure that the purchaser's qualified and has the money to purchase this property. So at which time I asked the purchaser's agent, which was a new agent, is your purchaser qualified? Do they have the money? Where's the money coming from? In other words, do they have a house to sell? Is it in cash? Is it in stocks and ETFs and bonds? Like, we want to know where that money's coming from. Is it coming from a mortgage? If it's coming from a mortgage, how much are they putting down? Where's the deposit coming from? This agent basically said it wasn't something they ever got into, and their personal finances, referring to the purchaser, wasn't any of their business. At such time, I told them, it's absolutely your business to make sure the purchaser is qualified so you're not wasting everybody's time creating a large pile of paperwork of purchase and sales and schedules to put together a deal for someone that has no money because the agent didn't talk to them and discuss practical matters regarding financing. Some people look at real estate, they figure they're going to come in with zero down and get a 1% mortgage with no income, and that's just not going to happen. Patty, my question for you is, do you feel, if you're representing a purchaser, that you need to make sure they're qualified so they're not wasting the vendor's time, the seller's time, so they're not spending hours preparing their house or whatever that entity is for a showing, going through the purchase and sale process only to find out You've just wasted weeks of your time and they can't get financing.
Oh, and there's so much more to that. So there's an easy approval, so a pre-approval online where you just insert your numbers. They don't really do a deep dive as to how much credit card debt and everything that you have, and it'll spit out a number, which is what I find most people will start with, and they get all excited and they immediately go on to realtor.ca or whatever third-party site that they choose to look at real estate through and start to dream. They start to hope and dream, wow, if this said this is how much I can, afford, they contact a realtor. If the realtor is like maybe one that you had mentioned, and I know in the past I've dealt with this as well, that don't ask the right questions, they immediately run out, they get the buyer through the property only to find out they haven't been pre-qualified with an actual lender or a mortgage broker or specialist. So the qualification to be pre-qualified is to submit all your numbers here so that there's an idea of what your ratios would end up being at so that you know your principal, your interest, the property taxes, your heating costs, what other car loans, credit card debt. Lenders want to make sure you can afford the payment amount for a purchase. And that's typically where you start to find the pre-approval number that you get online, and the qualified or the pre-qualified number can sometimes have a bit of a gap between them, and it turns into less of a number. So where you're setting the buyer up for failure, if you're an agent and you're just like a little Pop-Tart and you're just running out because you're all excited, you got a showing request on a property, where you're doing them a disservice is, let's say the property that they assume they can afford is $300,000. They're already dreaming, they're combing through $300,000, dollar properties online. And then they start the process. Like you had said, Michael, you're getting into all the schedules and the contracts and negotiating, and the seller's all happy because now they feel like they've got an interested buyer. Their property's under contract now. And the buyer, now that they actually have to bring the contract to the lender and start the actual qualification process on top of having a contract inserted, then they find out that you can't get financing. And now to try to tell that buyer who is now feeling very deflated, they may have spent $600 on a home inspection, is becoming very frustrated. The seller becomes frustrated and is questioning their listing agent. Did you not ask? Did you not find out this information? Well, no, I trusted that the buyer's agent did this. So now you got an irritated and sometimes agitated seller in the situation. And now you have to go back to this buyer as the buyer's agent because now you know they can only afford a $250,000 or a $225,000. Well, guess what the experience is for that buyer now? They go into a house that's worth $200,000 to $250,000 and nothing is up to the standards that met or aligned with their dream that they had when they initially started at the $300,000. So nothing is worthy, nothing is of interest, and you just sabotaged this. And a lot of times it's a first-time home buyer's ability to actually purchase a home at the amount that they should have been looking at in the first place. Because of course, there is going to be a drastic difference between a $200,000 and a $300,000 home. There's going to be a lot of work that's probably going to be needed.
The other thing that first-time home buyers, speaking of that subject, are notorious for is they just love to take all their pay slips and their income tax returns and chuck them in the garbage. Just a bunch of useless paperwork. Up until such time they realize that when they go to the bank to get pre-qualified, the first thing they're probably going to ask for is your statement. Is it a statement of assessment?
Your notice of assessment.
Your notice of assessment, which you just haphazardly threw in the trash. But Revenue Canada, in 8 to 9 months, will probably be more than happy to produce that for you again. In the meantime, you can't get mortgage financing because of your lack of organization.
Yeah. And that, Michael, also then brings you down the path of you should have your finances organized. You should be filing your income tax annually. You should have a CRA account, a Canadian Revenue Agency account online setup, because you can easily, through this platform, access your notice of assessment for the years previous. You should also keep somewhere in a cloud system a copy of your T4s or your T4As and your notice of assessments and your tax returns for the year before. You should be responsible and have these things in order, because these are the things that the lender is going to end up asking you. So don't wait until, because this is what I find happens, especially for first-time home buyers, Michael. They're scrambling and it takes them 2 weeks or so to just get the documents that their lender needs in order to process the sale file. And now they're asking for an extension on their financing.
And there's nothing more that an employer likes to do than reprint paperwork for the last 3 years that were given to the employee that they just threw out or shredded.
Yeah.
The other thing that you could probably do, which is a good idea, is know what you owe, what your expenses are as far as loans, credit cards, and that aren't resolved monthly. And I would probably suggest you set up an Equifax account, or at the very least, download your credit report to make sure that you've got a number that the bank likes to see, whether that's 600, 700, 800. The bank likes to see those higher numbers. If yours is 3 or 4, you may have an issue. Not may, you will.
Yeah, that actually is a really good point, Michael. And I was just with a first-time home buyer the other day, and one of my little tidbits of advice that I advised them was they should go in. There might be a service fee if you don't have an Equifax.
No, it's free. By law, they have to give you your credit report at no charge. But if
Okay.
you want the monthly service of watching your credit report to find out if there's any fraud or any variances or anyone trying to use your name to obtain mortgages in your name, Equifax, or whatever service you decide to use will disclose that to you.
Okay. So what I was going to say is pull your credit report yourself and then go to multiple lenders and share your credit report with whomever you feel fit that you would be interested in applying for a mortgage or potentially a mortgage with, because this should all somewhat be done prior to you actually entering into a contractual agreement, because this all takes time. My purpose and reason for saying this is because my daughter, who bought her first home, congratulations, Kayla, in Nova Scotia, she was having different lenders because she was smart, well-educated, and informed, and did her research and due diligence to make sure she was getting the best rate and being offered the best package. And because there were multiple hits on her credit report, I was amazed, Michael, that it dropped about 25 to 30 points with all these hits. So pull your credit report, and only the one that you're going to move forward with would you be signing off to allow them to hit your credit, the credit bureau themselves, so that you don't end up having, because that can make or break the difference of being approved or not.
What I suggest and what I do is I print out my credit report. I print out a bank application for a mortgage, because they're all the same, whether it's BMO, RBC, Scotiabank, TD, it doesn't matter. All they're looking for is income expense. They're looking to figure out your GDS, TDS, gross and total debt ratio. Attach your Equifax report. Tell them not to run it unless we go ahead with the mortgage with your firm. And this also shows them that you're actually shopping the mortgage. So you're actually going to other lenders to find the best deal, or what I refer to it as is the path of least resistance. A lot of times your own bank is the worst bank to deal with because they already have all your business, whereas if you're dealing with another bank credit union, they actually have the motivation to do what they can to get your mortgage, because they're probably going to try to get you to switch your RSPs, TFSAs, and everything else, brokerage accounts, over to them, lines of credit, so they can get you as a complete customer, whereas your bank you deal with every day, they've already got 95% of your business. Moving along, unless there's anything else?
No, I just make sure that, because again, some individuals are really tight and they've worked really hard, Michael, to get their credit score to a number that they feel they'll be able to get an approval for. So if you're not diligent or at least educated and informed, which is the whole purpose of you and I doing these episodes, this podcast, is to educate the public, you may find yourself in a situation where, and again, if you don't realize, every time your credit card or your credit bureau gets hit, it can go down. And I was just amazed. I would never have believed it would have been that significant of a number.
You should have listened to this podcast because we've covered that before.
I didn't realize it was about 25 to 30
Well,
points.
that's a lot. She probably went to a lot of different lenders. But we're going to go on to the next subject here. A lot of times when you're buying a vacant cottage, sometimes a vacant house, there'll be furnishings, there'll be kitchen utensils and towels and bed sheets and all kinds of stuff. Maybe there's an old trailer outside, like a boat trailer or whatever. A lot of times these home or cottage owners don't live in the province. They may live hundreds or 1,000 miles away. They don't want to come back to collect stuff once the property is closing. So one of the things that I do when an offer comes in, and they'll come in, they'll say, I want the cottage, I want the fridge, stove, microwave, but they don't address anything else. Legally, all those other items need to be removed unless otherwise indicated in the contract. So what I'll put in the contract is at the purchaser or at the vendor's sole discretion, they may leave behind whatever they want. That way, when you arrive at the property, whatever there is there, and you're not getting into, well, I went to close on the property, and this has happened to me. We're not closing because there's a pair of shoes in the closet and there's a jar of pennies. And in their culture, this jar of pennies meant someone died in this condo that I sold. So they wouldn't close, and there's some rocks in a closet. But if you would have put in that contract that whatever's there is there and closing because the seller was out of province, legally they would have been conforming to that contract and they would have been forced to close with their jar of pennies and the death. And there was no death. They just collected pennies because pennies are worth more than a penny.
Quite interesting. I completely agree along with you. I've had a property that had a boat, and this boat was there when these people viewed the property multiple times.
That was the one on the front lawn?
It was in the back, actually, kind of nestled
I had one that was
bit.
on the front lawn. It was an old fishing boat they used as a lawn ornament.
Yeah, this was the big boat, and the sellers had no intention of taking it off. They never wrote it into the contract that the boat was to be removed. So fast forward to closing day, again, this is a piece of land. The buyers were pushing back saying, we're not closing because there's a boat on the property. And the lawyers are coming to me saying, was there ever any conversation or point of contention? And I said, no, they agreed to purchase the property as it was. They never asked for the boat to be removed. They did a small adjustment in the price, and I'm talking just a few $100s to make the buyers feel a little bit represented.
Why didn't you take the boat?
I didn't want the boat. It was a big boat, and I would have to get in a truck and put it on this flatbed and try to haul it out of there, and I wasn't interested. But just be mindful, if there's something you don't want on the property, you need to make sure you spell that out in the contract as well. So if you're a seller and you're not interested in collecting, make sure you just have a clause going, it's as is, where is, and, we will not be going back. Purchaser acknowledges and accepts, that the seller will not be cleaning out or clearing out the property. Or if you're a buyer and you don't want that stuff there, ask for it specifically to
Always
be
be explicit, not implicit, and specify in writing what you want to happen with the property, and do not just guess that it's going to be done at closing time.
Yeah, because it's not fair to dump all this on the lawyers on closing day to try to interpret what was the intention behind these contract positions. Not fun.
What's one of the worst things you can install on the property, which makes showings and closings that much more convenient, especially when they're at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday holiday weekend?
A those keypads that run off of batteries.
Battery-powered keypads. If you want to use one of these, or the new ones are Wi-Fi powered, you just have your phone in your pocket. Inevitably, there'll be a showing and it will not work. This happened to me 3 days ago. Owners are in Alberta. There's no keys in the province. And they didn't install an alternate method to get into the property. If you are going to use a electronic keypad, I would strongly suggest you hide a key on site, or what I do is I bolt a lockbox, usually on the back of the property with a set of keys in it. So if the keys are either lost or the electronic lock doesn't work or the battery's dead, we always have a plan B. We've learned in the information technology business, which is my background, always have redundant systems. And I've also had situations where people were closing on a Friday night, drove from Windsor, Ontario, only to get here to find out the keypad didn't work.
Yeah, that's happened many, many times over my years of real estate. And the other thing is you walk up to a door and the keypad is it just looks like it doesn't even represent or present as a keypad. It's just a black bolt kind of area. And if you didn't know or were not given the instructions that you have to put your whole hand without a glove, especially in the winter when it's this cold out, you have to put your warm hand on this black section or whatever the keypad setup that you have to wake up the keys or the keypad. So then you know, here's where I have to enter in the code to get in. And if your hands are really cold, you're not waking that keypad up. So it is, like you said, Michael, really good redundancy to have a backup set of keys or an access to ensure that the showings can happen so you don't lose out on that potential buyer.
A lot of these keypads and alarm pads, we don't come across a lot of alarm systems in PEI, but they can be quite cryptic, and they like to use little figures and drawings and things. So what I do is I make a video of how to disable or open the lock and close the lock, and I do the same with the alarm panels, because inevitably you're going to get the agent that says, I'm looking for the 4 numbers, I can find those, but do I pressing the guy running away from the house or pressing the guy walking towards the house? If you do a little video of it, you can reproduce the motions and you can actually send it to the showing agents. Have you ever done that?
I have done a video. I've even done videos on how to open a lockbox for an agent because it was a brand new agent and they didn't even know how to get into the lockbox.
You can't beat videos.
Correct.
Agent asks you, is the road plowed in the winter? What is the best thing that purchaser's agent can do to eliminate any misinformation? And it's in the form of a PDF file.
It's on the government site.
So if an agent asks a listing agent, is the road plowed in the winter? And the listing agent says, yeah, it's plowed in the winter. You don't know what the circumstances behind that are. It could be plowed privately. It could be somebody that works for transportation and public works. Grandmother lives down the road and then she moves and they don't plow it anymore. If you do want a legal definitive answer as to whether or not that road is going to be plowed by the government, which typically won't cost you any money other than your property taxes, if you Google, and this pertains to anything you're looking for in the province of Prince Edward Island, gov.pe.ca, followed by whatever you're looking for, in this case, snow plowing on seasonal roads, it will actually tell you the road, and it will tell you where on that road it is plowed if it's not in its entirety. The other day, I had a plumber that was trying to access a property. He was trying to access it from the north. This road ran between 2 other main roads. The road's not plowed at that section, so I told him he sort of has to go around the whole area to come in the other side, which is plowed, but only plowed for 0.6 of a kilometer out of a 5-kilometer road.
Yeah.
So get that documentation unless you like plowing snow yourself or walking distances.
Yeah, because there's lots of private roads all over Prince Edward Island. They're not all provincial roads, which typically implies in this government.
Or seasonal roads.
Seasonal roads, which would allow you to know whether or not it is going to be a year-round serviced road. And part of the servicing is also your waste pickup and removal. So even if you do get your snow blown out by a local farmer, you're also going to have to make arrangements for your waste removal because the province isn't going to be going down these seasonal or private lanes in the off season to collect your garbage.
The other day, Patty and I went through a house, and it was wintertime, obviously. The driveway was nothing but solid ice. We're driving a half-ton pickup truck with nice new winter tires and four-wheel drive. And this driveway, I would never buy this house because it was what I refer to as a suicide driveway. So make sure when you're looking at a house and it has a driveway that's at a 30 or 40% decline into your garage, which you're going to inevitably smash through when it's all snow and ice, picture it in the winter. This property was absolutely beautiful. It was a treed lot. It was a couple of acres. It led to a main highway, which it wouldn't been well maintained. However, this slippery slide driveway they had, we could barely keep the truck from sliding onto the main highway, which also had two blind hills, or one to the left, one on the right. So you're coming onto the highway from your icy driveway, approaching a blind hill that someone could be flying over at 100 kilometers an hour. So always picture the property you're buying in the winter.
Yeah, it actually was very scary because our little recording studio here was the truck that we were in, and you started to slowly roll up, Michael, but then your wheels started to spin, and if it wasn't for having four-wheel drive, we were probably not going to be moving based on the location. If anything, we could have ended up sliding back because it was that thick of a layer of ice. So my message here, because this obviously was a home that is vacant and it's family selling it for family, they need to take some time and ensure the accessibility of this property or home is safe, because this particular situation that you and I had experienced with our potential buyers, they lost those buyers primarily because of the access. They were terrified to think, this is going to be my reality every winter. I don't want to deal with this. So, recommendation, again, very smart, Michael, to tell a buyer, be aware if you're looking at a property in the summer that this may be the reality, because I knew this property. I never would have thought this would have been an issue with the property until we experienced it. The fun didn't end there because it was such a sheet of ice. I almost had to be on my hands and knees to try to get from the truck over to where there was snow on the grass without falling and injuring myself, I know, which can get a little embarrassing if you're an agent and this is the way you have to show a property.
Interestingly enough, if you looked at the way the lot was, which was sloping, you're basically sitting on a floodplain, which was indicative of the unfinished basement in this house that was probably 40, 50 years old.
Yeah.
This 40, 50-year-old house that's sitting on the side of a hill had an unfinished basement, which you could look at, and you could tell they've had a lot of issues with water. So if you're looking at an older house, the basement's unfinished, and you've got scraps of old paint because they continuously tried to paint, repaint, or a lot of times you'll see hydraulic cement, which doesn't work, on the walls. This was also telling us that you're on a floodplain, and they actually had some water towers near this property. So I said to Patty, chances are you're sitting on a spring. So it doesn't really matter what you do. You're going to have a hard time maintaining that basement and not having water up to your knees in. So something to keep in mind as well. Older homes without finished basements, there may be a reason for that, and it could be, but not always, water infiltration. Patty, let's wrap her up here, and maybe you can tell them about our world-famous Facebook group and Toolbox Tuesday, is it?
Yes. So we have a Moving to Prince Edward Island, spelt right out, from the Michael and Patty podcast. It is a private Facebook group, and if you want more information, if you're looking for detailed lists from how to move, moving with pets, IRAC, the Island Regulatory Appeals Commission, condo lists, Toolbox Tuesday is a featured checklist or list of tools that you should know as a buyer and even as a seller when you are buying or selling real estate on Prince Edward Island. It is a jam-packed Facebook group. It's not just a bunch of side chatter and conversations. It really does have a lot of fact-filled content to help you make the best decision, and whether you're buying or selling on Prince Edward Island, keeping you well informed. It's just a segue off of this, and I wish this Facebook group, Michael, existed when I was moving to Prince Edward Island, because I would have been so knowledgeable and informed.
So if you're moving to Prince Edward Island, check out our Facebook group. If you have any questions about Prince Edward Island in general or PEI real estate, that is the platform to ask them. Have a great day. Thanks very much for listening to the podcast. Be sure to subscribe, give us some feedback, a star rating, thumbs up. We're on all kinds of different platforms. I'm not sure where you're listening to this, but just do what you can to send us a signal that you do and will be listening to future podcasts, and we'll make sure we produce them.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Michael and Patty Show. Until next time, have a great day.
Aren't you going to tell them MAPS?
MAPS, PEI's podcast that helps guide and navigate you through the buying and selling and everything PEI.
Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day.